The M1 Thompson. Without a doubt, one of the most iconic weapons, not just of World War II, but in all of American history. From the gangsters of the 20s, all the way to US soldiers and Marines charging across Europe and the Pacific with it. Everyone knows what this gun was. But many people don't know how the guns ended up in the hands of the gangsters and into the hands of the US government. Like with most small arms development during the interwar period, it was World War I that would spark interest in handheld automatic weapons for assaulting trenches. One of the men that would spearhead this was General John Thompson. General Thompson was an officer in the United States Army Ordnance Department. They were the ones in charge of the procurement of weapons for the United States Army. Thompson would retire from service and started his own arms company, Auto Ordnance. However, with the U.S. joining the Great War in 1917, he rejoined the Army and would again retire in 1918, once the war was completed. General Thompson, due to his connections within the U.S. Army, figured he could get some of his weapons adopted. This is where the Thompson submachine gun would be born. During the war, Thompson would develop a 30-06 rifle that would fire in full auto, the Thompson auto rifle, not the later Thompson auto rifle that would compete with the M1 Garand and was a complete and utter failure. Due to the problems caused by the cartridge, as well as a few other problems, they would instead change to a pistol caliber, eventually settling on the 45 ACP cartridge. The first gun that is recognizable as the Thompson came in 1921. The M1921 Thompsons would be shopped around the world for various militaries, but there was only limited interest in the guns. In the 1920s, most countries were only spending limited amounts of money on the military, with that limited budget being needed to modernize pretty much every aspect of the military in the wake of World War I. The Thompson submachine gun was a very expensive gun to produce and thus buy, meaning that spending a lot of money on what was seen as a mostly niche type of gun was just not useful. However, in 1926, Britain would buy a few, and oddly enough, one of the biggest buyers of the Thompson was the US Postal Service. Due to an increase in train robberies, the US Postal Service would buy the guns in order to equip the US Marines who were guarding these trains. This would lead to some interest in the United States Marine Corps. Although the most famous users of these guns were, of course, the various criminal elements tied to the Prohibition era. The Chicago Piano would become a nickname for the Thompson because of this. Pretty much every criminal group would end up with Thompsons in order to help outgun both each other and the police. With the pure firepower provided by both the 50-round drum and its 900 rounds per minute rate of fire, pretty much no other gun available could match it. Eventually, the FBI, which was changed from an army of accountants into an actual police force, would adopt the Thompson in order to help gain an advantage over them. However, the Thompson would fail to achieve a military contract outside of the few guns sold to the United States Marine Corps, who would use them in Central America and China. The main reason, again, was cost, even after the Thompson was simplified into the M1928 variant. The other major problem with the Thompson was the drum. While a drum was good for police and gangsters, it was not suited for military service. Drums are heavy and awkward to carry, so one drum on you is fine, but if you were in a combat scenario, you would have to reload more frequently, meaning you need to carry more drums, meaning that you could actually fit more ammunition using stick magazines instead of drum magazines, which is why militaries don't use drum magazines. So the stick magazines would be developed in order to help solve this issue. Then the late 1930s happened. As a certain mustachioed man was starting to eye up Eastern Europe, a lot of countries were like, oh, we need guns, and lots of them. Thompsons began to be bought at larger numbers, although it would take time to tool up a production line in order to produce them in the numbers needed. This was because back in the 1920s there was not a huge demand for them and therefore not a huge production line of them. Then in 1940, Dunkirk would happen, and the British needed even more guns really quickly, purchasing guns for as much as $225. That's nearly $5,000 a gun. As storm clouds approached, the US Army suddenly became very interested in the guns for pretty obvious reasons. After the US entered World War II, the Thompson would be sold to the US military at $130 a gun, and for other countries at $200 a piece. To put this into perspective, an M1 Garand costed $85. This would lead to the Auto Ordnance Company simplifying the gun into the M1 and later M1A1 variants of the Thompson, cutting the price almost in half. This included the elimination of the blish lock system, which frankly didn't even work in the first place, instead changing to a straight blowback system. A simplification of the rear sights, and various other things done to simplify the guns to both get cost and production time down. The The Thompson in military service was a successful design, although not as effective as popular imagination would imply. Almost every World War II movie, you will see someone, usually the guy in charge of the squad or unit, carrying a Thompson. Although the gun is iconic and popular in media, the military had a different view on it. A standard infantry squad in the US Army had 12 soldiers equipped with 8 M1 Grands, 3 M1903 Springfields, and 1 BAR in the early war. And later on, they would have 11 M1 Grands, 1 BAR as their standard armament. The Springfields was simply due to the fact that the M1 Grand didn't have its rifle grenade attachment yet. But suspiciously, a Thompson was not present. A Thompson was instead a gun that would be issued out as needed. Soldiers would be given the SMG when close quarters combat was expected, and usually only one would be provided for the squad. This is because while a Thompson had blistering rate of fire compared to the M1 Grand, it also had a much lower effective range, only being considered effective up to 200 yards versus the M1 Grand's 500 yards. Although combat would very rarely take place at those ranges, most World War II combat happened between 200 and 400 yards, meaning that the M1 Grand was useful far more times than the M1 Thompson. In short, the Thompson was a specialist weapon. The Thompsons were also issued out to rear-line units in World War II. Usually that would be to help fill gaps where there was not enough M1 carbines to fill them. The Thompson would actually be replaced during the war by the much cheaper and lighter M3 grease gun. The Thompson submachine gun would have a total of 1.3 million guns of all variants produced by the end of the war. The Thompson submachine gun was without a doubt one of the most famous guns of World War II, although its reputation is largely inflated due to both its pre-war use as a gangster gun and post-war movies. It still served an important role in the military, law enforcement, the criminal underground, and of course, the US Postal Service. This was Cavalier Historia, and thank you for watching.